All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, yet again, 45 minutes up until lock time. Second day in a row where it appears we will quite possibly be looking at some starting lineup changes, and I love some lineup changes. Lineup changes give us an opportunity to make some money, as many of you apparently did yesterday. I had some news yesterday with both teams changing their startup centers. I think we pivoted excellently, ended up being well over-owned on Myers Leonard. Damian Jones starting news came out. We were collectively, or at least speaking for myself individually, not enthused with the likelihood that Damian Jones would get both the time and play well enough to make any significant hay out of this opportunity. Myers Leonard, on the other hand, was fairly exciting and certainly was a critical piece of yesterday's slate. Read that fairly well. Myers Leonard, was in there 10 to 15% owned. I think about 15 on FanDuel, 14 and change, if I recall correctly. About all of 10 on DK, and was pretty great. And that worked out very well for us. So Nick Nurse dangling some ideas. He spoke both yesterday in some media availability and again today, indicating that there would be lineup changes. I've heard it alternatingly reported that there will be starting lineup changes or just lineup changes. I'm a big fan of Norman Powell because he specifically said that there will be more minutes for Norm Powell, who played 24 minutes and change in that last game. I think about 24 and a half, even if that number comes up to 26 or 27. He is an exceptional play at $7,000 on FanDuel and a mere $2,200 on DraftKings. This is a bit more hot takey than I usually get. I tend to be a little bit more nuanced. But I'm not sure Nick Nurse has a great idea what he's doing at this point. Some of these changes don't make sense, and I feel like he's casting about for answers. And if you read his comments post-game Friday, media Saturday, media Sunday, it seems like he feels like he has to do something. Which, again, you got pretty well spanked in Game 2, and you're down 2-0 and you're going home. So I think he's feeling the pressure to do something. I don't think he has much of a goddamn idea what that should be. Some of his comments, and I'm not kidding here, where you could go bigger, you could go smaller. We've got a lot of guys. I think there's a lot of merit to making some changes. I think your question here is, are you going to dance with the one who brung you to the ball? It's not early. You think certain series aren't for certain guys, but I also think that we've had bad biorhythms a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times in the playoffs. Then the next game, our biorhythms were back intact. So I trust these guys. I know who they are. They have big bounce back. That was yesterday. Today sounded certainly more so like changes are going to happen. Taking out Danny Green for Norman Powell is not a good idea. Period. There are ways it could work out, and we'll never know because it's a one-game slate, and we get exactly one opportunity at looking like this. But this team, if you get, 32 minutes of Norman Powell and 22 minutes of Danny Green as opposed to the converse, is not a better basketball team. It's just not. Sorry, and I like Norman Powell quite a bit. And Norm Powell's, been shooting better over the last 30 shots if you look at those two players. But that's not a good move. Danny Green is one of the more underrated players in the NBA. The difference between these two players on defense is vast, and the difference between these two players on offense is not as vast. Norm Powell brings some more energy, brings a better attack game. There are ways this can... And again, I really like Norman Powell as a play. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But this team is worse with Norman Powell on the court than it is with Danny Green on the court. My read of the situation based on the comments when they were said, watching them flow, A to B, is that Nick Nurse feels he needs to make a change, and so he's going to take out one or more of the guys in the lineup who have been doing the most poorly, which is pretty noticeably Marc Gasol, who has shot, I think, 2 for 11, then 1 for 9 in the first 2 games, which is, good reason to get him off the court. and served his purpose, beating Joel Embiid and the 76ers. Which is fine. Don't think the change to Serge Ibaka nets out being a huge plus-minus. And Danny Green, who is playing exactly the way... I mean, Danny Green was not terrible in the last game. Didn't get a ton of time, but took 6 shots. Took 4 3-pointers. Made 2 of the 3-pointers. Limited his men on defense pretty damn well. But, I don't know, a couple takeaways here for me. First, I like betting on the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. I think that line was already a little bit high by a point or so, just like last night, where the Trailblazers were favored by a couple, and I suggested a bet on the Warriors, moving us to, I think, 7-3 in the postseason. That's right, give or take a game. I like a bet on the Milwaukee Bucks this evening. We're now dealing with, I'm not sure that the favoring made a lot of sense before. It feels weird to say an underrated Bucks squad, but they have been historically good at protecting the rim this season. They've been incredibly efficient, usually ranking in any sort of efficiency ratings in the top 1, 2, 3, offensively and defensively the entire year. I'm a little more comfortable with their personnel. Not that this game easily can't be lost. Kawhi can have one of his super efficient games, and I'll go ahead and say that whereas Chris Middleton is a good defender, he has done better than I expected and continued to do so against Kawhi in his 5 opportunities to guard him this year. Still not terribly interested in Chris Middleton himself. Has been really poor as expected. Before Game 1, I was like, I really don't think you're going to see a great Chris Middleton series, and that has certainly been the case. But if you look at this last calendar year, and you go sort by, and again, there's the real plus-minus is a flawed stat. There's no really great stat at valuing players by any one statistic. It's more complicated than that. It has a lot to do with minutes and system and any number of other things. But if you right now Google... I'll just redo it myself because I haven't done this in a while, but I'm fairly certain that Danny Green was the highest rated by real plus minus shooting guard in the NBA this year. Let's do. And again, real plus minus is just basically a conglomerate of offensive real plus minus and defensive real plus minus, which is the player's individual impact on his team's offensive real plus minus is how many extra points you score per 100 possessions when he's on the court versus otherwise identical lineups without that player. And defensive real plus minus is the exact converse per 100 possessions. ESPN real plus minus shooting guards. Yeah, number 1, Danny Green. Now, that's crazy. I don't want Danny Green as my best player on this list. But the top 5 are number 5, Donovan Mitchell. Number 4, Victor Oladipo, who, again, played in 36 games. Everyone else is 65 to 80. Number 3, Andre Iguodala. Number 2, Jimmy Butler. Number 1, Danny Green. Taking Danny Green off the court against an extremely good offensive team and putting Norman Powell out there, who will now be, maybe gets up to the number 4 offensive option, is not going to work out for you long term. To me. Maybe other people disagree. If you limit your sample size to not knowing anything about basketball and just looking at what's happened over the last couple of weeks, sure, no problem. Makes some sense. But I think that's a terrible idea. And I think they're going to probably do it. But I don't know. I'm not a real hot takey kind of guy. I generally assume everyone knows more than I do. Vegas knows more than I do. NBA coaches know more than I do. Trainers, front office, back office, everyone. You can't convince me that playing a lot more Norman Powell and playing a lot less Danny Green is something that's going to help your team, because over their last 3 games, Danny Green is only shooting. Like, I think that's asinine. I think that's, and that's enough for me. Where I've already actually put down. I bet last night and won on the Warriors. That worked out. I've bet tonight on the Bucks. That's just not smart. Now, that doesn't mean there's not any... At DFS, again, he played 24 and a half minutes last game. He's really cheap. Coach said he's definitely going to get more minutes. That was one of the few things he was very firm on, Nick Nurse said. So, I like Norman Powell a lot. $2,200 on DK. Superlative value. Wonderful. Only $1,000 over the floor on FanDuel at $7,000. Absolutely great. If you get 26, 27 minutes, he's very good at those prices. Reasonably functional basketball player. I think right now I have him at 27 minutes, 24 fantasy points. 24 is just fine for 7,000, and for 2,200 obviously feels just brilliant. 100% norm if making 5 or 6 lineups. If he gets announced starting, I'm fine with that. And again, it's more advantageous and you should feel better about it the later that actual announcement comes out. If that announcement comes out in 2 minutes, 32 minutes before lock, I'm a little less excited than if that announcement comes out 9 minutes before lock. But it's, fairly hard to fail if we feel like minutes in the mid-20s. I assume you're asking on DraftKings. But would feel pretty similarly on FanDuel. Ibaka is fine. Moving, mucking around the minutes between Ibaka and Gasol, I still generally think I want a little more Marc Gasol than Serge Ibaka, but that'd be a pretty close distinction for me. Ibaka does some more things on defense, a little more fleet of foot, can do the help defense a little bit better. On Giannis, certainly in certain situations, especially if we're in transition. They've been really... One of the reasons Marc Gasol has struggled is that they've really been telling this team to run. Like, they've really, really pushed the pace. I imagine that continues. Ibaka's a little better in that game. Ibaka's going to do a little better closing out at 3 on Brook Lopez, which can be a threat as we saw in Game 1. There's other things that Marc Gasol is going to do better for you. He's going to distribute better for you. But that nets out pretty damn close to even for me. But, so the defensive assignments will be interesting here. Again, thus far in the series, it's gone exactly as predicted. And you will get this weird thing with Mirotic guarding Norman Powell, which isn't good for Mirotic, and Norman Powell guarding Mirotic, which isn't terribly good for Norman Powell either. Again, those rotations start pretty quickly. I'm not a big fan of the defensive lineups when they have Miro and Brook Lopez out on the court at the same time. But again, if you saw the last game, unlike Game 1, where I said I think there's a real chance that the Raptors get out to a big lead here because I worry about that defensive unit, partially because of just the presence of Danny Green and him needing to always be respected at the line, and if Mirotic isn't to guard him having to be out at the 3-point line and the holes that creates defensively, that works even better with Norman Powell, who can shoot the 3 just fine relative to Danny Green and just has a better drive game and puts them in a couple more spots. And if you're trying to push the pace, it certainly can work out for you. So, I would be a little more inclined towards the over, but more so if they go, we're going to start Norman Powell over Danny Green. And keep in mind now, you're running guys out there in lineups that are just not as used to playing with. Like Norman Powell, has not spent a ton of time on the court with Kawhi, with some of the other guys we're talking about here. So this gets, there's just enough there that I'd feel pretty comfortable placing that bet. Let me make sure. No, I didn't post a link, but someone else did, so I'll just retweet it. Sorry, thought that was all there. So, getting back to it, let's see. So the last game between these two teams, Game 2, was kind of a shit show. We had exactly 2 players achieve 30 fantasy points, being, unsurprisingly, Kawhi Leonard and Giannis. I haven't really adjusted my projections from the beginning of the series, where I had Kawhi a little bit under Steph with the current adjustments there, and that's still the case, where I have Kawhi coming in around 54 fantasy points a game, Steph around 55, and Giannis around 57.5. That's just about exactly how I still feel about it. That's going to get better if they make bad lineup changes. Again, the Ibaka one won't move that needle too much for me. But if you pull Danny Green out there and put Norman Powell out there, yeah, that's gonna kick him even an extra half point probably for me. That is a relevant change in my opinion. Other guys to discuss here. So again, we'll do. People seem to enjoy the refresher of how the lineups look. So the optimal DraftKings lineup for Game 1 of this series was Captain Brook Lopez. That was obviously his nutty, crazy, whatever that was, 57 fantasy point game. Giannis, Kawhi, Lowry, Brogdon, and Marc Gasol. Second game was Captain Giannis, Mirotic, Ersan, Leonard, Brogdon, and Eric Bledsoe, meaning that the only people to make appearances in both days were Giannis, Kawhi, and Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm Brogdon's been a little more efficient than I would expect him to be. The price on FanDuel is not as ideal as I think we'd like it to be, where he's 10-5. I would still rather play Eric Bledsoe for a better shot at some sort of super ceiling game. I'd have to think for a while about Mirotic. I would much rather play $9,000 Brook Lopez. I would much rather play, if he's starting, $9,000 Serge Ibaka. I'd have to sit there and think about it versus Ersan for a while. They'd be, reasonably close to each other at their current prices. DraftKings, it's a little bit more incentivized. And there are a couple guys like that today who are distinctly better on one side. Pascal Siakam is kind of unexciting for me on DraftKings. FanDuel, his price has come down, where almost everyone else is increasing or at least staying pace. He's down to $12K flat. That's a number where I'd want to take some shots at that. Again, the curves, the distribution of how these guys' salaries interrelate are very different from site to site. The specifics of this not terribly relevant, but Pascal Siakam on FanDuel, I'm pretty happy to take a shot at. DraftKings, he's, assuming he's not your captain, he's $9,000, where you're getting Brook Lopez is still less than 6, and, Norman Powell is 2, and Eric Bledsoe is 6.4, and Kyle Lowry, who I have projected for 1 raw point more than Pascal Siakam, on DK is $1,400 less. On FanDuel, to go from Pascal Siakam to Kyle Lowry, you have to spend $500 more, and that's a pretty distinct difference. On both sites, well, it's close. On FanDuel, I would certainly rather play Pascal in GPPs. I think the ownership will make that beneficial. Last game was bad. Didn't look good. Hasn't shot well either game this series. Managed to climb out a decent game earlier, but, took 20 shots in game 1. Made 6, but missed a pile of open corner threes, which he can make. My point being, 1 game slate, you're looking for any sort of advantage. A guy who can pick up an upside. Who's going to be reasonably low owned, and if you're looking at 20-25% Pascal Siakam, that's a pretty exciting number for me. Should be pointed out, all 3 regular season games, someone can check me here, but all 3 regular season games Pascal Siakam played against the Bucks with Giannis. I believe he played all 4 games. Giannis was only present for 3. Pascal had, I think, 35, 38, and 42 fantasy points. Numbers certainly that are more than enough to take a risk here, and it's worth pointing out you don't necessarily need that much. Like, someone was just telling me, I don't really want to go with Eric Bledsoe. He's been so bad so many games in a row. Eric Bledsoe was in the best possible lineup, both sites last game. It's got a lot to do with what other people do. On a 1-game slate, last game Brogdon was better because he was cheaper than Bledsoe and put up a similar number. Actually, he may have been more expensive. He was more expensive than Bledsoe, and still is. By $600. Bledsoe's minutes seem secure, whether or not they should be. And we have, those 5-minute halves. Obviously, there is a perilous floor there. The matchup isn't particularly good for anyone on either of these teams. So people outside of, top 5 players in the game like Giannis and Kawhi all have a floor. But I still like Eric Bledsoe quite a bit in tournaments. And again, he gave you 25 last time, and that was good enough to be in every best possible lineup on every site, which seems pretty relevant there. Is fading Giannis for a balanced showdown instant death for your lineup? You're saying showdown, so I presume you're talking about DraftKings. On FanDuel, yeah, probably pretty much. On FanDuel, I don't have a problem if you want to play a player over Giannis and put Giannis in your 1.5 spot because you just need one guy to outscore him, and suggesting, and obviously the most likely candidate to do that would be Kawhi Leonard. So saying Kawhi Leonard is my MVP and Giannis is my all-star on FanDuel, where you're not spending any extra money, I can see doing that. And if I'm going to make a non-Giannis MVP lineup, but other than that, you're counting on something going really, really weird in this game because you don't have to spend any extra salary and just there's some decent value. It's going to be pretty weird for non-Giannis, non-Kawhi MVP to work out. But again, game one of the series, did Brook Lopez actually not outscore just raw points Giannis in that game? It's really close. I'm going to look. I don't recall. Brook Lopez had 57, I'm pretty sure. In game one of this series, Giannis had 60. So no, Giannis still got him by a couple. So on FanDuel, assuming that the differential wasn't that big, and it might have, I guess I will check their FanDuel scores because this can be closer because that was the game that Burlow had like 5 blocks. So let me find it. In game one of the series on FanDuel, Brook Lopez scored 57.2. Giannis scored 59.8. So no, even in that completely bizarre circumstance, you still wanted Giannis on top. So it's an ownership question for what are the odds when you say I'm going to play Kawhi as my MVP and Giannis as my all-star on FanDuel, that I'm going to, what are the odds that Kawhi outscores him? I presume he outscores him something to the order of 1 out of 4 games. You could make an argument it's 1 out of 5. That might be a little closer, but it's somewhere in there. And I suspect maybe the discrepancy in ownership is great enough that actually maths out as the correct play over an extended number of plays of the situation. So I really don't mind that. It's obviously well more risky. But again, I have these two guys projected within about 4 fantasy points of each other. So, yeah. It's interesting when we look at Toronto for the tension and minutes on this team because, as we saw as things got more tight and later in the series with Philadelphia, there's an inclination to shorten the lineup. They went down to 7 players for some games where they completely expurgated, Powell or Van Vliet, who were playing very poorly, and Ibaka got a pile of minutes off the bench, and they went down. That's it. This is a must-win game. We're just running our best guys out there, combined with the fact that they're now saying, like, hey, let's play some more Norm Powell and some more Serge Ibaka. Those obviously are working at cross purposes. So I just find that personally fascinating for exactly how the hell this is going to go. But it's difficult because I like Norm Powell. I like Storm and Norman, as we've dubbed him from time to time. But that's tough. But yeah, FanDuel, well, I guess we talked enough about that. But yeah, Siakam again deserves, I think, a little extra interest there at those numbers. I liked both centers before the last game. They were both really bad. Marc Gasol obviously has not been able to shoot for shit. It was pretty good considering you could not make a shot in the first game. And if you told me he was going to continue to play, he played 39 minutes and change, I think, in game 1. Took 11 shots. Game 2 played 19 minutes, took 9 shots. That's a lot of shots for Marc Gasol. In that first game, he's getting a shot per a little less than 3 minutes. Second game, 9 shots in 19 minutes and change. That's kind of exciting. If he hadn't been blown off the court, he's going to play 35 minutes, take 16 shots. That's pretty exciting. Doesn't seem very likely at this point. But a guy who can really pick up the peripherals in every other goddamn way. Who's your captain on DK if you have one lineup? Right, so after that long elaboration on FanDuel structure, DraftKings is a little more interesting. I certainly by any cashy standard still think Giannis as your captain makes the most sense. But you can obviously build some pretty interesting lineups where you don't have to punt anybody with Captain Norman Powell instead of, he's 2,200, so he's 3,300 as your captain. And then you get to play everyone else is good. So you can play Giannis, Leonard, Lowry, Siakam, Guy, Bledsoe, Lopez, whomever, and basically play any lineup you want to after that point, I think. Sure, that could work out. You need 2 things to happen. 1, Norman to be productive, give you, 20, which turns into 30. And none of those guys to be crazy good. There's a somewhat complicated multivariable algebraic equation that would explain it, but if any one of those guys does significantly better than the rest, then it won't work out. And if Brook Lopez, again, who's, only, I think, 56 or 5,800, so he's up into the mid-8s when he's your captain. If he put up 50, you would bust it, but, if Giannis gets 70, then, yeah, Norman Powell as captain was not going to work out for you. Powell isn't starting now, just more minutes. Oh, did we get news and I missed it somehow? I will do some searching just to make sure I didn't miss news here. Powell isn't starting now, just more minutes. So is he still a captain spot? I don't know if that's... again, when I'm hosting by myself, this gets a little bit slower. I don't know if that person is saying we've reported news and they have the same starting lineup. I don't see that if that's the case. So you're saying, as of right now, can you play Captain Norman Powell? Yes. I frankly don't care if he starts or not. I just don't think they're going to completely expurgate Danny Green from the lineup. They're saying he's going to play more minutes. Whether or not he plays 29 minutes starting or 27 minutes off the bench doesn't change a whole lot for me. Good, you wanted him to come off the bench. I would too. You want less time on the court with Kawhi, not more. You want so I would have to think long and hard as to whether or not I think the news coming off the bench versus starting is good or bad for Norman Powell. I would generally prefer to have him come off the bench, I would think. I don't think the minutes he loses would make up for the slightly higher usage and also the ownership. Yeah, I think Jordan just phrased his question somewhat poorly there to those who are asking for a source on that news, because I don't think that news exists yet. Let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about before we pivot to this news as it comes out. So, Serge Ibaka is an interesting case. He's not so cheap. Like, Serge Ibaka is $9,000 on FanDuel. Okay. Let's assume he starts. How many minutes do you think he sees? There's a chance it's 35, 36. There's a chance it's 28. And at that point, I would still have him projected less than $9,000 on FanDuel Brook Lopez, for example. If you go look at DraftKings, he's priced very nicely. $4,200 works well. But again, we sort of already have $2,200 Norman Powell. That's kind of exciting. $3,800 George Hill. That's kind of exciting. $3,400 see who can take more charges, me or Kyle Lowry. My favorite part of the series, Ersan Ilyasova, are also interesting too. Now we're getting later and later and towards lock. So if we don't get this news towards... there's news. Lots of my shit is blowing up. Hey, look at that. All that, they're not changing a goddamn thing. No changes in starting lineups for the Raptors. Okay, so yeah. And again, I think that was misreported. A lot of people are like, Nurse will make changes to the starting lineup. That's not how I parsed his comments whatsoever. He said, I'm going to make changes to the lineups. He didn't mean that. Anyhow, okay, so I won't take the time saying that. But again, be careful. We have this thing in the DFS industry where someone says something and there's a telephone game and someone sort of takes it out of context. And I went back and reviewed each individual line he said, and I didn't see anything that said, I'm definitely changing the starters. And he said, I'm going to change the lineups, and people went, oh, that must mean the starting lineup. And yeah, that isn't what was fucking said. So, still fine with playing all the Norman Powell you want. I would not completely give up on... Alright, so just give me a second to think how exactly I think this is going to change and whose minutes are going to move where. I kind of like Marc Gasol in tournaments now. He's been bad. There's no way to say it other than he's been bad. But the price, especially on DK, is pretty cheap at $6,000. The price on FanDuel, 11.5 is more than I want to pay for him. But I would have some exposure in tournaments is the easiest way to phrase that. There is an upside for him to achieve, and he is still getting the start, and he has missed open shots and shots that I generally think as a basketball player he can make. So I don't have an issue running some Marc Gasol in tournaments. I would probably run something like 25% if I was multi-entering to get over the field, because it's just simply not that impossible that he puts up some decent numbers here. Bledsoe or Lopez? Yeah, that's pretty close for me. I have Bledsoe projected, I think, just a hair lower, but I think the ownership is better there, so I probably stick with Eric Bledsoe. But I have them very close. I don't have a strong take there. I would generally prefer either of them still to Malcolm Brogdon at their prices. Lopez or Mirotic, DK, GPP. Yeah, I'm still going to stick with Lopez there more often than not. I've been a little bit worried about Mirotic's minutes. Some of the time lost in that last game was the blowout. Looks like he's still going to see 24, 25 minutes. But he is another guy who potentially loses more time if a game stays close and they go to 31 minutes of Brogdon. Would not shock me. Still sticking with Hill over Connaughton. A couple people have asked me about Connaughton today. The price obviously on DraftKings now down to $2,800. That's fallen to a level where I'm a little more excited to take that shot, but still none for me. I'll still spend the grand more for George Hill or a little bit more for Ibaka, but at this point he's running the same starters, and he's saying Norman Powell is going to get a few more minutes, which presumably will come largely off Danny Green. I don't think they're going to come off Kawhi down 0-2 at home, and I don't think they're going to come off Kyle Lowry, so that's really where they have to come from. They can reduce Fred even a little bit more, but a lot of much ado about nothing there. The Bucks will also start the same starters, so lies, I tell you, lies! Nothing going on there. Winning lineup gonna have Middleton. Middleton last slate was owned. I pulled down the ownership from last time. Like, he was down to 32%. So ownership's last slate. We had Giannis at 92%, gonna be about there. Kawhi at 89%, gonna be about there. We had Mark Lopez. Mark Lopez, saved by the bell. We had Marc Gasol at 59. That's obviously gonna come way down. We had Kyle Lowry at 50. It's a little more than I'd want to have. We had Mirotic at 38.5. That'll come down a little. We had George Hill at 23. We had Brook Lopez at 32.5. That's pretty exciting for me. And then he had a bad game. So we're going to get Brook Lopez, who we just saw can have a very good game in this matchup, at 29% or something. That's pretty exciting. He was owned almost identically to Pascal Siakam and Chris Middleton. Pretty excited to have more than that of Brook Lopez and Pascal Siakam. I'd have less Middleton. Bledsoe is at 31%. I figure it'll be about in that range again. Serge Ibaka was already 30%. Ersan was 25%. That was the big winner there. And he's still just objectively priced well too cheap. Don't know if he gets as much time as he did. Obviously, that was, that may be the best game he's ever played. Probably not going to get that again. Brogdon was 16%. And again, has been in the optimal lineup both days with the slate, and his price did not rise from game 2 to game 3. He was $6,000 for game 1, $7,000 for game 2. He's $7,000 for game 3. Danny Green was 13%. Dude's still starting, I'm just saying. 13%, and again, Mirotic guards him for a while. The most likely outcome is he still takes one shot per every 5 or 6 minutes on the court. Just not super involved in the offense. But getting a guy in a one-game slate who's in a good matchup, micro matchup, at 10-12% owned is pretty exciting. 10.4% of people still own Pat Connaughton. Moving on. Yeah, it's one of the other things was Nick Nurse said that the lineup changes are more about the defense than the offense. Like, you're making lineup changes to make your defense better, and you're taking out Danny Green and Marc Gasol and putting in other players. Okay. And I like Serge Ibaka. He did some things very well. I mean, you're still going to be a net loss on defense versus Marc Gasol. So that's just a little weird. Did Fred VanVleet get 23 minutes because the last game was a blowout? Yes, he did. Might be the dark horse tonight. I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I think it's more likely that he loses minutes to Powell. I think he's the one who loses it the most. Someone says it was not due to a blowout. Just looked at popcorn machine. I he did not play in the super blowout Chris Boucher run for that game. But he did get some extra run because of the fact that they benched Danny Green and benched Marc Gasol, which again I don't think is the way they should go or are likely to go. I think Norm takes some minutes from Fred VanVleet, but again he played 24 minutes in that game. He was ass, but I am projected for 18 right now, and I'll stick with that as a projection. Can you give us a thought on what you think the Warriors do if no Iggy tomorrow? I have them currently bumping up Alfonso McKinney to about 26 minutes. He's obviously still well cheap enough that makes a lot of sense. I think basically the rest gets smattered around. Again, Steve Kerr is a big fan of having a little schmear of all the players on the team, so you could see more Quinn Cook. He was really bad last game, even though he made 3 of his 4 shots. He had it was a really funny game when you look at plus-minus, where Quinn Cook looked like he played okay, had a pretty bad plus-minus for that team in a game they won by 11 points. Klay Thompson was a -1. Yeah, really. Klay Thompson, who was good and had his chase down blocks and was very good in fantasy for, I guess game 2 he only had 30 fantasy points, but was good game 1, good game 3, played like 40 minutes in a game his team won by 11, played brilliant on both ends of the court. Klay Thompson was a -1 in that game, I'm almost certain. Other stuff, other questions. George Hill on DK. Yeah, I'm fine with it. I expect him to keep most of his time, if not all of it. FanDuel 2-gamer, who are your favorite 2 small forwards with Norm 3.7, Giannis 12, and Kawhi 10.5? I don't like to answer questions when I haven't looked at everything and every guy, because every question relates to every other guy. And you may think, what are you talking about? There's those 3 guys at their prices, but I don't know what fading, let's say, Giannis for Norman Powell and giving me $8,300 gets me without messing around with it a little bit. So I will decline to answer your question. I don't like answering when I'm not fully informed, and I would really have to spend time with the 2-gamer slate and figure out what that money gets me. Off the top of my head, those 3 guys are roughly as appealing to me. No one I look at where I go, Giannis at 12 or Kawhi at 10.5 or Norm at 3.7, I'm like, pump the fist. I like having guys who are close to the minimum who I can drop and carry some sort of upside, and Norm fits that bill. But obviously those other 2 players could very possibly be the highest scoring 2 or 2 of the highest scoring 3 players on the slate. Why don't we play Brogdon over Lopez? I think you may be speaking to someone else. Thoughts on Brogdon today? FanDuel is the same price as Lopez. I prefer Brook Lopez. I have Brook Lopez. I reduced him a little from last game, where he was obviously terrible, but I still have him around 32 fantasy points, and I still have Brogdon around 27. I'm not sure how the ownership plays out. I expect them to be pretty close to each other in the low to the mid-30s, so I generally think I would still rather play Brook Lopez, yes. Ibaka or Hill on DK Showdown? It's pretty close for me. It's going to have to do a lot more with correlation than anything else. Like, there's some negative correlation between, Hill and Bledsoe and Ibaka and Lopez, so I'm assuming you have Ibaka and Gasol. I'm assuming you have no Marc Gasol, so that's not overwhelmingly a concern. There is also some negative correlation between Siakam and Ibaka, but they're fairly close for me. I would pick whichever one doesn't futz with some other part of your lineup. Just the 3-point block potential for Lopez is worth playing him at 9 on FanDuel. Yeah, he's been really good. He was really good at both ends of the court. Last game was a little bit squirrely, but yeah. Brogdon isn't the same price as Lopez. On FanDuel, I believe actually Brogdon's more on FanDuel. Yeah, I think you're correct now that you think about it. Yeah, Lopez is 9 on FanDuel. Brogdon is 10.5. And I have Lopez projected for higher. On DK, Brogdon is also 1,200 higher. So I'm a bigger fan of playing Brook Lopez both sites over Malcolm Brogdon. Thanks for whoever said that, but yeah, I had those numbers memorized. Norman Powell and Ibaka show for the bench you watch. If people are going to show for the bench, likely to be those guys, right? So, when he, no, it's fine to yeah, go home. You're drunk. No, it's fine to make a mistake. Yeah, again, the biggest, there's not a lot of actionable news here at this point. They sat Danny Green and Marc Gasol for the entirety of the fourth quarter in that last game and played better than they had. They won the fourth quarter, I want to say 35-30. Now, there were some more scrubs out there. It's sort of an interesting scenario to discuss. But, the thing to keep in mind is that Toronto is sort of desperate to win and has shown a ability to go to the bench. So there's a real chance that you get no Marc Gasol, no Danny Green, most likely, in the fourth quarter there. What do we got? We got about 3 minutes. All right, so I'm going to get into some alerts for a second here. Answered everything else I think would be redundant. Brogdon, Powell, and Ibaka, or Bledsoe, Powell, and Brolo in a FanDuel GPP. I would be more inclined at this point to play Bledsoe, Powell, and Brolo. Again, both sides had Powell, so you're basically saying Brogdon and Ibaka or Bledsoe and Brolo. I would be more inclined to play Brolo. Again, I don't know if you have Mirotic. I assume you do have Giannis. It changes things around. But generally, Bledsoe and Brolo just project better for me than Brogdon and Ibaka. Norman and Ibaka, you love lots of minutes. Likely. I have them both actually for, I think, one for 26, one for 27. I have them both playing, pretty significant minutes at their prices. I'm a slightly bigger fan of Norman at his price, but certainly no issue with you playing Ibaka. And it'll be interesting to see where the ownership comes in on these good men and thorough. Have we gotten a new dog update or any new fast food takes? We can do that sort of nonsense after lock. But we're just sticking with the one dog, it turns out. So there will be no Toby for Bobby, which I suppose if he gets traded away, Bobby and Toby, from each other, that will be factually correct. Them no longer being together. Nick Nurse not changing his lineup. Yeah, which, by the way, I should go back to saying the line still seems about right. I'm still a little more inclined to bet on the Bucks than anything else, but putting Powell in there would have been a mistake. Sorry. Have I seen Boban's appearance in John Wick 3? No, I know it's there. I'm going to take my Boban and we're going to watch it together. It's going to be great. Of course, lineup changes can mean many things. Yeah, he said it was not complicated. He said there will be lineup changes. Everyone assumed he meant starting lineup changes, and my absolute first thought on my daughter's life was, he didn't say starting. I don't know where people are getting this. And you look at his comment. Anyway, yes. So there were no starting lineup changes, and there probably shouldn't be. You could say you want to put Ibaka in there. Again, I'm okay with that. I don't think I would. I would have stuck with it and said, we're going home. Maybe we can take it home in that way. But yeah, things. That is how it goes sometimes, my friends. That is how it goes. Alright, down to about 90 seconds, boys. So Giannis or Kawhi, the Nuts captain on DK. I would still play Giannis more often than not. Kawhi is probably equally as good of a tournament play at this point. And we can discuss this in a second. We will look at the ownership. I will pull up my phone and see what their ownership is and what their captaincy ownership is. And, it's 30 seconds out. But since we can determine that, we will take a look and see if there's, anything brilliant that could have been done there or should have been done there. All right, about 20 seconds or so. Raptors pregame video still doesn't include Kawhi. Seems on. All right. Here's the pregame quote exactly from Nick Nurse. Yesterday you talked about some potential lineup changes, and again I read you some of the things he said on Saturday. Are you making any, and if so, what are they and why? Nick Nurse said, quote, yes, I think there will be some lineup changes. That's for sure. I'm not going to share what those are at the moment. We're still trying to figure them out. but definitely I think there are some other guys that emerged in this series. We're trying to figure out the best matchups here as we go, so you'll see some different lineups today. And the fact he used a plural there probably indicates that he was referring to, who's playing together and when and all that stuff, not specifically, the starting lineup. So we've had a long cherished history in DFS of fucking that up, and we continue to. FanDuel, Eric Bledsoe, 20%. That is execrable. That is egregious. That is dumb. He doesn't need to crush face. 20% for Eric Bledsoe is wrong. I don't care what he does. You can get 11 tonight, and you can be like, you're so dumb, you like Eric Bledsoe. On a one-game slate, Eric Bledsoe playing 29 or 30 minutes at 20.8. So 21% owned is absolutely preposterous. Norman Powell, 40. Ibaka, 33. Brogdon, 32. Yeah, again, that's where I expected all those guys to land. Kawhi, 82. Giannis, 80. 1 out of 5 people let Giannis go. Brook Lopez, 32. Again, that is too small for his price on FanDuel. And let me find a Pascal Siakam. That's the other guy I'm really interested to see. 31 on FanDuel. Not quite as low as I would have hoped, but still a pretty nice number. Let me go to the phone. Let's see if I have the setup so I can look at the captaincy ownerships. Someone has probably sent it to me already. But nothing better than the scintillating entertainment value of watching a man with poofy hair look at his telephone. Paul, if I can have some telephone-looking music. Okay, it's logged in. Best in the beast of the east and the $450,000. Okay, I'm looking at things. Looking at guys. Giannis Antetokounmpo is 35% of the captaincy at 92.5% owned. Kawhi Leonard is 27% of the captaincy. Yeah, no, I want Giannis then. Yeah, that's basically it there. No, that's not enough of a differential. If you had Giannis 50, Kawhi 20, you're in the range of maybe we should go there. Maybe even closer. Again, I don't have them projected that differently. So maybe even closer than that, but not 35 to 25. Obviously, Captain Kawhi, when you are not playing Giannis, the 8% of lineups that don't have Giannis Antetokounmpo in them, makes a good bit more sense. Let me just click through some lineups on the phone, have some fun here. Again, Eric Bledsoe, 23%, too little. Ersan, 30%, that's too little. Norman Powell, 37%. That's probably too little. I mean, unless Nick Nurse is lying to us, which is possible. Played 24.5 minutes, and he said he's going to get more. We'll call that a minimum of 25 minutes. I'm pretty excited about a minimum of 25 minutes out of a guy at $2,200. So that feels like an edge, which is nice to catch an edge once in a while. Let's find some other guys there. Marc Gasol, 23. A little higher than I would have liked. But Gasol at 23 there. Serge on DK, 48%. No, that's too much. It's too much. I'm just here clicking on lamps. If you got him 30, 35, that's fine. That feels good. I don't want 48% owned Serge. So I see things changing, so the game is already underway, so I will let you all go to enjoy it. I presume I will be on for some number of consecutive days until we are through these conference finals, so I suppose, in theory, as few as Tuesday being potentially the last day, because Warriors could close it out tomorrow, and Bucks could close it out the day after that, and then we would get 9 days off before the finals or something. But there it is, friends. So best of luck. Hope everyone's good fortune continues going forward. Hope everyone enjoyed their weekend. Enjoy your Game of Thrones. Enjoy your WWE pay-per-view tonight, and enjoy your Eastern Conference Finals. With that, I am Fast Eddie Fear. Good luck and bon.